Hey, Alex, welcome to Mitiga Mic.
Thank you very much for having me, Brian.
So, Alex, before we begin, maybe you could give our listeners a little bit of background on, who you are and how you came up and what exactly it is you do.
Yeah, totally. So I'll give a little bit of my journey here. I was career-wise, I was at Microsoft for 15 years. I spent about half my career there working actually in developer tools, compiler technology, things like that. I got really interested in human-computer interaction and natural user interfaces. And so then after that, I kind of worked on a lot of their Microsoft's next-gen devices. So I had worked on the Kinect device for Xbox, doing, far field body recognition stuff, HoloLens, speech platform. I then went over to Unity Software, so Unity 3D game engine company, not working in gaming, but actually helped build a new product for creating synthetic data to train computer vision models.
Wow.
And then after that was recruited over here at Andesite, joined as employee number 2. We are focused kind of in the AI for SOC area. But yeah, I've been working in artificial intelligence now about 13 years and really being able to apply a lot of what we've learned over the past few years, especially on like how do we build products? How do we actually make AI products effective for people so they're not frustrating, but apply that to another industry, which has been a super interesting journey for me because I get to learn a new domain, but I get to apply a lot of the learnings in technology towards that new domain.
Yeah, that's awesome. What an incredible background. And we first met, of course, a few months back at the Silicon Valley Signet, I believe, Signet
Yes.
event. And I was introduced to you, and we started talking about AI, as everybody does at these conferences, and just everybody does, period, these days. And you told me about your background. I was like, wow, you've actually used AI, and it goes back more than 2 years. And you have some real experience here. I thought, you'd be great to have on our podcast. So I'm so glad you could join us. I want to kick things right off. There's an area of focus that I know you've spent a lot of time on, and an area where you really dive into as it relates to AI, and that's this whole automation versus enablement, if you will. And how much do we expect to see basically in AI when we talk about automating work versus enabling that work?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question. And we actually get this commonly, this question just about, like even as we build products or especially the security product we're building, how much like are you going to automate away security analysts or are you going to automate away this job or that or whatever? And I think the reality is we're going to start like in general, you start with enablement. It's very hard for any sort of like technology revolution like this to just jump all the way to this full hey, yeah, we're going to take everything away, right? Like, when the internet came around, it's like, are we going to stop having physical servers or anything like that or whatever? No.
Yeah.
And
Will
so
the postal service be replaced by electronic
Right.
mail, right? We're still waiting. We're still
Yes,
waiting.
we don't. Yeah, exactly. We don't have ponies, but we still have trucks delivering things right to your mailbox. So, yeah, these things take a very long time, and I think we actually can get pretty far just focusing on enablement right now. There's so much stuff in many industries, not just security, where people still have kind of very rote, mundane parts of their job that they don't enjoy, right? And those are actually the great things to sort of like try to hand over to AI or try to enable a human and an AI to work more collaboratively on. And I don't think we're at a spot yet where AI is really ready to fully automate that many things.
Thank you.
I think there's a spot at which we'll get there, and after we figure some of the other parts out, but it's just not at that spot yet where I think people trust it for that purpose. And even if you look at how do human operators use technology in general, they often automate in pieces. There's still a lot of things that you do where it's like, okay, even on the technology side of the world, it's like, well, I have this script that automates this one thing, but it's like I kick off that script periodically, or maybe I put it on a schedule, but every once in a while I do the thing manually, whatever. So people kind of figure out how to take these tools, scripts, AI, whatever, and they sort of manipulate them around the person's like how they work, right? And so I don't think it's necessary to like completely jump to the whole automated thing. I think another factor here is we haven't really figured out how to think of accountability for AI systems yet. So like when AI is wrong, does the wrong thing, takes the wrong action, whatever, who's responsible? Like who's what's the legal policy around it? Do we have policy across all industries? one of the first places where we've had to deal with a lot of that is actually in the autonomous vehicles industry, because that was one of the first ones that really started to get into heavy AI automation of something. And you kind of see all of the challenges they've gone through about like, okay, what is Waymo or Cruise responsible for when X happens, and or how much of it's, whatever. What if there's, a human person in semi-autonomous mode, like who's, so you get into all these challenges, right? So I think we've got a ways to go to just even figure these things out. And so I think we'll see people or companies, enterprises, organizations, really just focused on how do we view this as an enabling assistive tool for probably foreseeable future, at least the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, I've spoken to so many organizations about their use of AI and their use of automation and different areas of security. It seems like enabling is the track that we're comfortable with right now, and having anything that's fully automated. There's a lot of question marks around that, right? Especially when it comes to like incident response and things of that nature. So I kind of think of it like an exoskeleton, right? The humans still doing their human thing, but now they can lift more, run faster, do things that they wouldn't be able to do by themselves.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that a little bit because you brought up incident response. So you can even think of these in different parts, right? Like incident response is a particular, when the things that AI might do there can potentially be very destructive actions, right? When you're talking about, AI assistance for, let's say, exploring data or doing things that are sort of like not destructive actions or something like that, right? Like, so think of, AI helping you in the sim environment where you're just kind of exploring alerts and things like that. The actions are not necessarily as destructive. So it actually gets a little bit easier to do that more automated, because if it's wrong and there's a way to quickly evaluate it, okay, not a big deal. On an incident response side of things, when you're responding, taking action, doing something, you can have a more of a destructive action there. And so that's where we have to be a little cautious on like how much is this an enablement thing with a very strict human review versus, okay, that can automate and be wrong from time to time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well, as we said at the beginning of this, everyone's talking about AI. You walk around RSA or Black Hat or throw any conference in there, everybody's talking about AI, and we're AI first, even though it's a 20-year-old company that didn't start talking about AI till 2 years ago. But okay, you're AI first, great. So folks are implementing some kind of copilot right now. Everyone's dipping their toes into it or jumping maybe a little bit deeper. But from a consumer perspective, an organization, a CISO, some group that's making a purchase, how do we sift through all this noise? Because now there's just like so much out there, and there's so many add-ins and this and that, and what do I buy, and what products do I invest in, and or do I do it? Do we do it ourselves? Do we bring it in-house? How do I get through all that noise? Again, from someone that's been doing this for a very long time.
Yeah, totally. So one thing I always like to point out that with modern AI, the problems in modern AI have really distilled back down into some of the challenges that we've always had in AI, right? When we talk about things like hallucinations or whatever, we used to call that a false positive in just classical machine learning or whatever. So we've been dealing with the same problems for a while, and the types of things you do to overcome these challenges are actually similar in nature. It's like, how do you test and evaluate and validate things at scale? What data are you using? Things like that, right? So one of the things that I always like to point out is like, let's say you're dealing with like a vendor, maybe even an internal team that you've got or something like that. Always think about, I was like, what's the background of the team, right? Have they kind of worked in this domain before? One of the things with modern generative AI, and you see it with like, vibe coding and stuff, it's like we are now bringing technology to people that have previously not been experts in that thing. And it's democratizing it. So it's making it so easy to use, right? So it kind of gives the illusion that it's like, okay, yeah, you just pick up this technology and it just works and you know how to use it, or you integrate some AI into your product or your operation and everyone just kind of knows how to do it. But I think it's important to, you'll end up finding a lot of the same challenges we've always dealt with especially things like validation. Like that's one of the really big ones, right? And so I think knowing that you've got a team behind that has some experience in actually even classical AI solutions or machine learning solutions, I think is important in this kind of early stage here. Another one I would say, I think it's going to be hard to really narrow in on one the best or whatever, right? And so I think there's some element of just hey, try before you buy, right? And even for vendors like us, that puts some work on us because we got to convince people that our stuff actually works, right? One thing I always like to say too is, it's actually not very hard to make an AI demo, right? Getting a working AI product, the difference between a working demo and a working AI product that actually adds value is actually fairly significant, and it's particularly high with AI-based products as compared to even classical products. I think that there's always a delta, but the delta when AI is very big. And so there's just some amount of like, hey, be prepared to try out a few of these things, right? And see what works. Likely going to have to carve off the time to do it within your organization because, whatever, but also, look at things like people talk, right? And I think understanding what, who else has used this product, who else has, what have they run into, that kind of information. I think that'll really help people kind of sift through some of the noise. The last thing I would say too, which is just something to kind of watch for, a lot of AI right now is being sort of branded in a way where it's like, okay, such and such existing product, which has been around for 10, 15 years, is like, okay, now we've got this AI features, right? And really it's a copilot. So the product is still the same. It's the same product, same value prop, whatever. It's just there's a chatbot on the side now, right? Yeah. I think those are interesting, but if all you're doing is sort of integrating a chatbot on the side, I think that's going to be a challenging value proposition. Because, whatever that thing is doing, it's likely the case that Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, something like that can kind of almost get the same effect, really. So, I just always want to caution people. It's an existing product where the product itself isn't transforming based on AI, but instead it's just they're tacking a chatbot onto the existing experience. Yeah. I would question that a little bit.
Makes me think back to the Microsoft paperclip, which I don't know if you developed that, but I'm not pointing fingers. So let's talk a little bit about. So I guess let me do this. So I remember at the early years of the sim industry, I used to be with ArcSight, and we had implemented anomaly detection and pattern discovery and temporal analysis and volumetric analysis and all these capabilities. And some people might even call that sort of a first generation or leveraging machine learning for some of these capabilities. And I guess to some extent it was. But between then and now, you're seeing a lot of organizations that have tried to incorporate AI into their cybersecurity use cases. And this isn't just like in the last couple of years. This has been going on for years. Kind of unsuccessful or largely unsuccessful. But I think that was a previous wave. Do you see this current AI wave, if you will, kind of yielding different results?
Yeah, this is a really great question. And I too, when I kind of walked into the cybersecurity industry 2 years ago as part of joining this company, I could definitely tell there was a lot of skepticism about AI machine learning. I think from some past failed activities in that world. I wrote.
Well, remember the famous T-shirt from DEF CON? It said, if somebody says it's machine learning, it's written in Python. If they say it's AI, it's written in PowerPoint.
So true. Yeah. So on this topic, I wrote an article about this a few months ago, but just to kind of capture some of the points there. So first, I do think that this what you're seeing, the shift that you're seeing happen right now is fairly sizable and is pretty legitimate. And I got to watch over time kind of some of the shifts that have happened in AI machine learning, over the past 10 to 20 years. All the way from sort of some classical, you wouldn't even call it machine learning, more just classical algorithmic approaches, all the way to deep learning, and now to where we are with sort of like foundation models. And I think what the thing that's really changing the game right now is the current model architectures have enabled very, very, very high capacity models. When we say capacity, sometimes people talk about these things in terms of parameters, whatever. I like to just think of it in terms of it's like, what is the amount of information that this model can store and can really reason over, if you will. So after this sort of transformers architecture was introduced, that really was like an approach towards scaling to very, very, very large size of models. Well, in fact, these models are now so big that they can actually take a pretty large sampling of the entire internet and train on them. And the effect of doing that is you've actually taken a humongous corpus of knowledge. So think of Wikipedia, but times, thousands to millions. And you've now got a single model that like has that much knowledge. Well, it's pretty interesting because possessing that much knowledge actually allows you to do some interesting things, like something that's generating code is actually kind of, you can kind of think of it as like it's manipulating words in a way to generate something just based on all of this knowledge it's accrued, all these different code samples it's seen and stuff like that, right? So we just haven't had technology that's been able to do this. We now have things that, you hear about AI using tools, right? And being able to call APIs and do stuff like that. Well, it turns out these models have so much knowledge baked in, they actually can be given sort of a prompt of something, and they can reason over like, how would I call this API to get the result I need? Which is super interesting, because now you've kind of got something that's starting to think like how a person does when they're trying to do like write code or do things. And so it's really like the sheer capacity of these models and their ability to reason. You see them being thrown at every kind of task, and they seem to do pretty well at it when they're given the right information in the right context. Even in our work, right, we're actually using AI agents to do very deep analysis of data that's spread across your enterprise, where we will generate a query, look at the result, the AI will look at the result of that query, and then come up with a follow-on question and work through it in like an investigative process. Well, that's pretty fascinating, and it does it actually quite well when given the right context. This is something that previously, like if you tried to build, models to like go understand your data at this level, previously you needed a very, very, very large amount of training data as an enterprise. Now these models off the bat, they don't need a lot of you don't need a lot of proprietary enterprise data to make them work. They work pretty well out of the gate, and with integrating some other components, a little bit of maybe like RAG or fine tuning, you actually get to something that works pretty well without your enterprise needing all of this proprietary data, right? So just kind of coming back to the original question, these models off the shelf are so powerful to start with that, it's kind of democratizing the ability for people to use them for all these different use cases. And that's really what's changed, right? In the classical world of just like trying to do network anomaly detection, like you had network data and you needed a large amount of training data to understand what normal is. Right now, these models can reason over normal kind of on their own. If they're given some historical examples and then what's happening right now. So it's just a totally different type of approach.
Yeah, it seems like the barriers to entry are much lower then, right? For somebody that might not have access to this massive amount of data, or whether they have to buy it or they have to grep for it across the internet for however long they need to do it. It's making it easier, and it just the efficiencies and the effectiveness, and you can be a little bit more sloppy. I've noticed that in the earlier days, people had to be much more efficient. It's almost like writing code. People had to be very, very efficient because there was limited memory, right? Then they could get a little bit more cavalier with how things were done. It seems like we're in that phase.
Absolutely.
But you mentioned some interesting things, because we've been talking about this a lot from, I was visualizing it like from a defender's perspective. And anytime a new technology comes out, whether it's, I don't know, the internet or AV equipment or mobile phone or social media, whatever, there seems to be three groups that always adopt it the quickest. It's the military is one. For whatever reason, the adult film industry is another one, or the adult entertainment industry, I guess. And then criminals. So it's, I think we all know that criminals are also looking at AI, and bad guys are also considering AI. But from a broader scale, I think people are considering AI from an offensive side. And that's not always bad guys. That could be red teams. It could be nation states on nation states. But how do you expect the threat landscape to morph, if you will, with these AI offensive weapons?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll see kind of this in a sort of like two paths or two vectors here. So the first one is just simply doing the same things that they've always been doing, the criminals and nation states have always been doing, but doing it at significantly higher scale. So let's take phishing, right? Phishing is still kind of the most common way to get gain unauthorized access. What used to be like, okay, well, I had just run some phishing campaigns, whatever. I generate maybe a few of these a day, whatever. With generative AI, you could generate thousands of different phishing campaigns a day. I mean, and so it's like the sheer scale of the sheer scale and sort of semi-realism of those campaigns, or the ability to just make them pretty realistic and slightly tweak a thing here or there, is actually pretty overwhelming in and of itself, right? And so I think that's going to be one of the bigger things we have to be worried about sooner. It's not the sophistication, just the scale. Now there's other things kind of going on with like, okay, generative AI used for novel malware. That gets into a little more of the advanced category. And I think this is absolutely happening. I don't think this is going to be the biggest threat at the moment, because this has kind of always been going on, right? And so now it's just becoming maybe those attacks are getting more sophisticated, but not everyone's actually doing that, because it's not the easiest. It's still not the easiest one to do. Scaling out phishing is actually easier. There's even some more recent security research around this concept of C2-less malware. And this one's actually kind of disturbing when you think about it. But the idea here is like, you've got some command and control type system set up where there's not even a human at the keyboard, actually. Like you can almost just give the system or the infrastructure a goal or an objective, and the system, through a series of iterative, stuff that involves some Gen AI and code writing and script generation and API and tool usage, will actually just execute its own operation on its own, right?
Oh, wow.
So I don't think this hasn't really gotten to the point we're seeing this like pervasively, but this is definitely one of those ones where, our typical ways of discovering like, hey, who's the person behind the keyboard and whatever, some of the stuff that tends to happen within nation states, including our own, that just gets harder to do, because it's almost like you've dropped a system off inside of some infrastructure somewhere, and then the human's really not connected to it. So it's even harder to find that that's even happening, right?
Wow.
And it's hard to predict what it will do, because you don't know the intent. So I think what this really raises is the importance of scaling defense. I think some of these more advanced use cases, that's a much harder, that's going to be maybe in the future of security research about how do we deal with that particular problem. But just for the average SOC or the average CISO, I think it's really the question of like, you have to do something to deal with the sheer volume you're dealing with. And I think without AI as a defensive weapon, I think that would be very, very challenging, because there's just a fundamental limit to how much the current products and the current humans using them can really scale. So we kind of have to innovate in some new techniques so that we can actually have a chance against the offensive.
Yeah. Well, with these nightmare scenarios that you just laid out, in my mind, I was just thinking about attribution and how difficult that would try to be, because you're
Absolutely
not really sure what's the end goal. What are they trying to do? So now, putting on my CISO hat or a security leader hat, and I need to start budgeting, right? I need to figure out, okay, some stuff's coming down the pipe. I need to put together a security budget moving forward as it relates to AI. How should I approach that? How should I look at the actual dollars and cents of this and what I need to invest?
Totally. And this is actually I'm very empathetic to this one. This is a very tough question at this stage. Again, going back to any technology revolution we've had, whether internet, cloud computing, mobile, it's always for any IT leader to think about, like, how much do I invest in this thing over the next couple of years? It's a little hard to say. Like, from our current vantage point right now where we are, we just don't have enough patterns of like seeing what the value is to really know what the budget should be. So empathetic to the problem. My view on this is like, it's always good to start. Like, I think it's important to start somewhere and start to build in the learnings of how do we figure this out? How do we evaluate these products, these new types of products correctly? How do we evaluate AI correctly in terms of its value add to us? Because it's going to take, at least a couple of years here. I think we've got a couple of years, even for companies like us, to sort of like sink or swim and prove our own value. And on the other end of it, I'm expecting security leaders will be sort of evaluating what is our actual ROI of these things. Some organizations have had special budgets to bring in AI technology. So if I was a CISO, I would be going around working with my CFO, my other leaders, the board maybe, and say like, hey, we really need to unlock some budget here. Simply just to go invest in AI, right, as a potential thing. And that's maybe even a little separate from the budget that I'm using to just manage my day-to-day SOC, right? So look for special budgets. And one thing I'll say about this whole thing too is, I think there's a lot of room for some very thought-leading CISOs to really innovate in the space and be some of the early adopters and be pretty innovative and sort of teach the rest of the industry how do you bring these technologies in and how do you evaluate them? Back to your earlier question, like, how do I sift through the noise? I think there's a lot of room for CISOs to stand up as leaders and kind of be able to say, yeah, here's how we approach this process, and this is what worked. These are the types of things we look for in the companies, whatever. And also to be able to champion that, like, 2 years from now, here's how we fundamentally transformed our SOC over the past 2 years and our security operations with AI. So lots of room for thought leadership here. And I think it's a pretty exciting time, honestly, for CISOs.
Yeah, I really do. And it's one of those things where I don't think they have a choice. They have to adopt it. At what scale, I don't know. In what direction, I'm not sure. It'll be different for each organization, but it's almost like, do we have a website? Right? Do we go on the internet? Right? These types of conversations that were had, God knows what, 30 years ago, 25 years ago.
Absolutely.
But so technology is imperfect, and AI is no different. We talked about hallucinations, false positives, and there's certainly insecurity. There's plenty of dealing with that over the years. So are these, because AI is a little bit of a different animal, are these issues going to disappear to a large part over time? And until that happens, what are some ways maybe we can work around some of those known problems?
It's a fantastic question. And it's the top of a lot of the security leaders I talk to, it's top of mind for them. I like probably 70-80% of the meetings we have where we do, product demos and things like that, I get a question about hallucinations. So I totally understand. So here's what I think. I do expect them to reduce over time. And we already are seeing that trend, right? As these models get better and better, and we learn more about how to build them correctly and things like that, I absolutely expect to see reduction in hallucinations. Will it fully disappear in the truest sense of the word? I would say the answer to that's probably no. But I also like to point out on a lot of these things, humans have these same challenges. Humans actually do hallucinate. In some sense of the word, we don't really call it a hallucination per se, but humans make incorrect inferences about things, right? Sure. So for any one problem we can talk about with an AI model, I would say you actually have this problem with the humans today, right? I think as I mentioned earlier, we're definitely in the stage of having a lot of human in the loop type work here. So how I like to think of this, there's kind of like a different way to think of the entire thing. Is like let's say I've got an organization of people. No technology. Even within that organization, I've got strengths and weaknesses of those individuals. And I really, as a leader, need to think about how do I balance out certain weaknesses in the organization with some other strengths of some other people, right? I actually think about the same when we introduce AI into the mix here. If we really view it as an enabling technology, AI has weaknesses, but it has strengths. Its weaknesses, yes, it can hallucinate, things like that. Its strengths, incredible scale, right? Just incredible scale. So what I think we have to look at is how do we sort of get the best of what humans do and the best of what AI does, but kind of collaboratively working together so the strengths and weaknesses of each balance each other out. And I think that's kind of the general approach we have taken when we're building our product. And I think it's something important for, I think, security leaders and organizational leaders is they're introducing AI technology. And it's like, yes, we know this thing will make some mistakes. So what are we doing so that the human team around it knows how to, maybe just simple pragmatic things, best practice guides, or even just writing down and documenting like, hey, we've adopted AI in our team, and here's some common pitfalls, things to watch for, things we know, seen it trip up before, and just document that so that it's kind of the rest of the organization can kind of know and work around that. Even little things like prompting guides. Prompting guides are so useful, right? Because there's all these little tips and tricks about how to do good prompting when you're using generative AI in an interactive scenario. Those are helpful. So I think really trying to build out like a collaborative kind of sort of ecosystem by which people and machine can work together best is pretty important to overcome.
Yeah, I love that because we always talk about AI augmenting the humans, but now the humans can help augment the AI and
absolutely true.
That's very well said. Well, Alex, as we wrap up, I think we have time for about one more question, and we're going to go a couple levels deeper probably than we've been so far. So I want to talk about MCP, so Model Context Protocol.
Yes.
And anybody that gets past page 1 of AI, this is usually page 2 in the discussion. So it seems to be all the rage. How do you see this impacting the industry, but maybe more specifically, the security organizations? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And, it's even reached the point of where it's sort of at meme level now, and there's memes about MCP and things like that.
Yeah.
Like, let me sell you this pen, the funny one, let me sell you this pen, it comes with an MCP server or something like that. So just a reminder what MCP really is at its core. MCP is a protocol. So you can kind of think of it as like USB, right? It's a way for two nodes, if you will, of some type, of a specific type to communicate with each other. And so you see that like this has really picked off picked up in the industry. A lot of organizations are standardizing around MCP. Everyone is starting to release MCP servers for their API sets or for whatever it is that they offer. And the idea there is just that it makes it easier for somebody who's building or wants to incorporate an AI chat agent or whatever. It just makes it easier for them to sort of adopt that technology to be used along with that sort of AI or whatever. And so in the security industry, what's interesting about it is, we've got massive tools proliferation in this industry. In fact, that was one of my first observations when I started working in cybersecurity was like, the MLOps ecosystem that I used to work in used to be a very fragmented industry with lots of different tools and all the things like that. But cybersecurity is like all on a different level. Yeah. There's so many products, so many different tools, whatever. This is where I do think protocol and even things like data format standardization generally helps us out as an industry, because it makes it easier to take any one thing and connect it to any other thing, which I think is important in cybersecurity, because it is a holistic problem that needs a lot of different data, a lot of different tools. So MCP, I do think, is going to continue to help with that, to connect sort of generative AI systems of sorts with these different tools in the ecosystem and make them effective. So two things I always like to note about this. Number one, not every MCP server. So what MCP server would be like a sort of a wrapper over the top of whatever the capability is. Let's say it's like a CrowdStrike API and you have an MCP server for it. You still have to implement the MCP server that wraps that API and then communicates with that protocol over to an AI system. Not every MCP server is actually a good implementation. So this is similar to hey, not every API is actually a good API. Just because it's an MCP server does not actually mean it's necessarily a good MCP server. So I think people have to keep that in mind. The second thing is, not everything we want to do with these tools or with these APIs goes directly to an AI, right? And so even if you look at the type of product that we're building, we have some things where it's like we do have an AI agentic system that does work with these different ecosystem tools and can theoretically use an MCP server and things like that. But there's also a deeper integration into our product that connects even into our UI with these tools. And so it's like MCP doesn't necessarily help you a ton with that part of it. So just like a reminder that, hey, this is really a certain type of protocol meant for a certain purpose, and it has some value to it. But all of that said, I think these standards are great. It moves us more towards an integrated world. I'm really glad Anthropic led the charge here. I think we will see an uptick in AI extensibility from all this. It'll make it a lot easier for companies to build their own sort of in-house AI solutions that just connect to the ecosystem of products. I think we'll see multiple marketplaces start to spin up and things like that. So I think these are all generally good things, and I'm actually pretty excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned the fragmentation. Most organizations have dozens and dozens, if not sometimes hundreds of different security tools. But just being able to bring together your prevention, your detection, your response capabilities for on-prem and cloud and everything in between and mobile users, there's just so much out there that I think having an AI component wrapper, whatever it is going to be, MCP to kind of help with that process. It's where the industry needs to be. Well, Alex, this was a awesome conversation. Thank you so much for being part of Mitiga Mic. We enjoyed having you, and hopefully we can have you on the show again.
Awesome. Yeah, really appreciate it, Brian. Great conversation, great questions.
Talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you.